Welcome to the video. In this video I'd like to talk about this model here. This is the Shuriken X1 from HolyBro. Now we've already looked at one of the earlier models from HolyBro and you can go and see it here. That was the Shuriken 250 I think it was called, and that was a great little model. It was one where all the electronics were inside, had a cute little camera on it, a little on-screen display, and flew very, very well indeed. Now this is another one of their models. This is the Shuriken X1, and as you can see it's that kind of cross racer style. Now recently we actually built something a little bit like this, not quite as nice, but we did this in the Quad Building for Beginners Series 2, and you can go and watch how we actually built this thing. But for those of you that are not interested in actually building quadcopters but want something like that straight out the box, this is definitely an option. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to very quickly talk a little bit about the model, show you what comes in the box, because we've added a couple of extra bits on here. I want to point those out. Then what I'd like to do is talk about the features, because it has a lot of cool stuff on here. They really seem to have thought about this and done their homework. We've made a couple of modifications, surprise surprise, and then what we'll do is I'll show you the Betaflight configuration, because this comes pre-flashed with Betaflight 3.0, which is great, and then we'll get a little bit of flying footage, show you what this thing's actually like in action, and then finally have a quick summary. So let's very quickly start about what comes in the box. Apart from the model, not an awful lot indeed. Once you take the battery off the bottom it becomes quite slim, and in the actual box itself you get the model, you get the mount for a GoPro session camera. We don't have a GoPro session here, so we've had to make something that will fit another style of action camera. We're running a run cam here. Then you get some spare props. Then you have things like the other battery strap, which you can use for the top part to hold that camera in place, and also the joystick that goes on the back of the camera, because it's a CCD Sony 600 TVL line thing in here, and as usual with those kind of cameras you can access the menu and change the settings. So apart from that, that's all you get, but that's because all the goodness is already in the model. So a couple of features, specs and bits and pieces. Now before I go any further, I do need to say a very big thank you to HolyBro. They're the guys who sent me this to have a look at. So I'll point you to their website if you want to have a look at this. We're going to go through the specs and the pieces that are on the website, and we'll also have a look at the manual as well. So in terms of kind of the key features here, it's a very thick frame. It looks about 4mm. It's full 3K carbon fibre. Looking at the cross section under a microscope, it does actually look like that as well. I'm not going to drill it to find that out. It has a F3 based flight controller, an on-screen display, a video transmitter, and pretty much everything else, all included in one single PCB. Now hopefully you can kind of see that. Everything is done on this one board in the middle that's very nicely tucked away and protected, so that all the gubbins isn't going to get smashed if you crash. Now the only thing with this of course is that if you get a load of soil and dirt in there in a really nasty crash, then you're going to spend a happy 20 minutes trying to blow it out with canned air, but it does make for a very, very low profile installation. The transmitter for FPV has the connector at the side, so that's nicely out the way, and it's mounted on a nice big thick piece of carbon fibre. Hopefully the camera's picking that up. So it's mounted not only on the PCB itself, but there's also this big strain relief piece, which is nice. In practice, the way it tumbles around is the top does get a little bit hit on the antenna, but the way that is set up is really been thoughtful about making sure that this doesn't snap off the PCB in the event of a hiccup. It does come with its own antenna. We've been flying it with a couple of antennas. This is the Ionway that we use. We've also been using those Menace RC Raptors as well, those pagoda style, which have been fantastic, and actually those of you that follow the channel have probably seen this model with one of those pagoda style on it in a previous video where we kind of previewed it a little bit. It has an integrated on-screen display, as I've already said, running MWOSD version 1.5, so that should be nice to set up. Should tell us exactly what's going on, and we'll see what that looks like later in the video. 600 TVL line camera at the front. It's a beautiful camera. Actually, we'll see what that actually looks like in practice. The challenge that I had with this, and I put it back to its default position, this is how it comes in the box, and the position of the camera, the lowest you can get it is about 45 degrees, and then it goes up to insane degrees, so you can literally have it pointing right out the front. Whereas if you just undo this spacer, and all these spacers are very nicely knurled, if you pop that spacer into the top piece instead, then you can drop the camera down a little bit more. LEDs at the back, so those are controlled by the flight controller. The two buttons here are just underneath for the configuration of the FPV transmitter, switchable between 200 and 600 milliwatts, which is nice. Being able to pop it down to 25 would have been brilliant as well. It's a full 40 channel video transmitter, so it's got race band as well. The real clue that this is a speed machine is if you look at the motors. Hopefully the camera's picking that up. These are T motors, and they're F40 2600 kV motors. Now, we've had some 2600 kV motors for a while, and we've kind of been looking for a frame to put them on. I very seriously considered putting them on that other frame where we use the Emax 2205 2300. The 2600s produce a stupid amount of thrust, and they make this a very, very quick model, but it does mean that you're going to go through quite a bit of battery. Speaking of battery, this is what I'm flying it with at the moment. Just take this off the bottom. I'm using a little graphene 1.3, not getting a ton of flight time out of that, probably about 4-5 minutes if I'm being very gentle, but it's a nice size for this. It's a 4S pack, and acts as landing gear as well. It does have a nice carbon fibre plate that's just the right size to cover that battery at the bottom. It kind of protects it when you come down and land. To bind this thing to a radio is a piece of cake. You can get these with 3 inbuilt receivers. There is our friend the FR Sky, which is what we're running here with a Taranis. You can also get a DSM version, and you can also get an FASST version as well. And the way you do it is dead straightforward. Is you just power it on, pressing and holding this little button here that you can just about see by the side of the antenna. That's the bind button, and then you're bound and set, ready to rock and roll. Now, the Taranis that I've bound this to is non-EU, and it absolutely bound up fine. I don't know what that would mean if you have an EU transmitter. I'm guessing that the inbuilt receiver, if that's what this is, can actually support both EU and non-EU radios, but that's not something we've been able to test here. So connected it up to Betaflight. Let me show you how it looks by default. So the flight controller itself has just the gyro and accelerometer, and again you can see in the top right hand corner the data flash has a chunk of data in it, so it definitely looks like these guys have tested this model. So if you wanted, you could look actually at the data flash and see what they've done with it, but I do like to see that in models. It's an indication that they haven't just thrown all the components together, stuck it in the box and stuck it out to the retailer. The flight modes by default, a little bit interesting, but this is designed as an out-and-out racer. So there's an arming by switch on auxiliary 1 by default, and then auxiliary 2 is your flight modes, and you can flick between having air mode on and off and horizon mode on and off as well. I've changed it so that the flight modes are consistent with all my other quadcopters, otherwise I just get completely confused about which one I'm dealing with, and I have to then play with the radio and remind myself before I can do anything. Then they have the LED settings, so there's the LEDs for the back. WS2812 configurable. Ours by default are all set up for red. The layout here is slightly wrong, because actually it should be a pack of 8 LEDs in 2 rows of 4, but this works absolutely fine. And going into the CLI and typing version, you can see here that we're running Betaflight SP Racing F3 version 3.0. Last thing I'll show you then before we go to the field, and I'll show you a bit of flight footage, is the manual. The manual itself is very simple and basic because there's not a lot to do really, it's all set up for you. So in here it has the list of features, we've just talked about most of those. The specifications in the top right hand corner. Oh, the only thing I didn't mention was these are 30 amp BL Heli ESCs, 40 amp burst capable. They need to be that size to run 4S with something crazy like these 2600 kV motors. The buying process is there for the 3 different types of radio, and then underneath that you have the settings in Betaflight for how everything's configured, including how to set up the video link and set up the on-screen display and everything else. So there isn't an awful lot in the manual, because once you've bound it, made sure that the travel's okay, that the midpoints of all of the pieces are okay on all the channels, then you're pretty much ready to fly. The only thing I will say, just be a little bit careful. What I found is when you power this thing from the USB, it does power the receiver, so you don't need to plug in the battery to do the binding, which is nice, but it did power up the LEDs at the back of the craft, and it also did power the configuration bits at the back for the video transmitter. So a little word of warning, do remember that that's the case. If you're going to plug it into your PC, it's going to pull a little bit more current than just an SP Racing F3 flight controller on its own, and also make sure that your antenna's installed before you do plug it into the USB cable, in case it is powering the video transmitter. So now we've talked about that, let's go to the field and do a little bit of flight footage. So here we're looking at from the line of sight view, so thank you to the cameraman for doing that, and inserted is some FPV footage from another flight so you can see how the camera performs. Okay, let's try a punch out. Are you ready, cameraman? Yep. Oh yeah, that's quite fun. The model itself is very agile and very fast and has absolutely tons of power, as you'd expect. The LEDs are easy to see at the back, actually.
They are very.
That's good for orientation. But the camera, if you just watch that for a second, there's a little bit of interference with this FPV footage, but you can see how beautiful everything looks. The model behaves exactly as you'd expect a well put together model with a half decent tune on it. It's very fun to fly, it's very quick, and it's very aggressive.
Jesus.
I do like the on-screen display, the way they've laid it out, and just with the minimalist stuff that you need to know is perfect. You've got the mode in the top left-hand corner, the voltage left in your battery, the amps that you're pulling as you're flying around, and then the flight time in the lower right-hand corner. The only thing that's missing is a milliampere hours consumed. That would have made it the perfect OSD for me. So now we've had a little look at the flight footage. You've seen how stable this little guy is. We've been flying this now for about 3 or 4 weeks. You can see now that I tend to have my camera slightly low down. We're not out and out racers here like some of the other channels are. And because of that, I think we've had slightly less fun with this than some of the people. That's simply because this is such a little powerhouse. It's very quick, it's hyper aggressive, the design and the components have been very well chosen to make sure that it flies beautifully. But there are a couple of things that it's worthwhile mentioning. So in ours is a pre-production model that goes between 25 and 600 milliwatts. The ones that are actually on sale are 200 and 600 milliwatts. Personally, I think it would have been amazing if we could have had all 3 of those powers available on the Switch, or be able to order it with either 25 or 200, because the fact it doesn't have 25 milliwatts on, this one does, as I've said, but the production ones typically don't. That if you had 25 milliwatts, then you could race this and take it to events and be able to fly it without falling foul of any of the maximum power laws. The camera mount on the top is particularly aggressive, we've already talked about that, and it's designed for a very specific camera. If you want to mount other things, we designed this little 3D printed goof here that kind of goes in, that we sit the run cam on, but you could do exactly the same thing with a couple of pieces of foam board. It would have been nice if that angle had been adjustable too. We've got a couple of other frames where it is, and it means that if you want to fly like you stole it, which is this is absolutely designed to do, it's perfect. Or if you want to be a little bit more sedate and maybe do just some practicing, then you could reduce the angle and still get everything in the view. One thing I will comment about are the props that come with it. Now the ones that came with ours, not sure if this is in the production run, these were Mr. Steel 5x4x3 reds. Now this is the spare set that we've got, and I've ordered some other props that we're going to put on instead. The reason being is these are spectacularly fragile. They're very nice props, but we have pretty much destroyed the first set with our first little crash. We clipped a gate and the rest is history. So if you're going to buy this, I consider getting some more spare props, because if you're going to be flying it like it's meant to be flown, then these will only last one crash and you'll potentially have to replace an entire set at a time. Last thing I'll talk about in the video, which is kind of related to this, is the HolyBro have obviously designed this flight controller that sits in here that has the on-screen display in it, the FPV equipment and everything else, and it works really well. And now HolyBro is one of those manufacturers. Now we've had 2 things from them, and both of those have been very good. Now interestingly, they've just started to produce flight controllers. Now we've got our hands on a set here, and they have kind of 3 different versions, and we potentially are going to have a look at these in a later series. But what it does mean is we have another manufacturer here that's starting to get into the flight controller market. And again, we have things like an F3 base board with an on-screen display on the back and a little solderable XT60 connector here too. So these kind of boards, I wish I'd have had them when we were doing our quad build for beginners series 2, where we made a similar frame to this, because using something like this would have made it so much easier and neater, because from my first look at how these boards are built, they seem to be really nicely made. Time will tell when we actually put them in the craft and start flying them, but I just wanted to draw your attention to those, because if these boards are anywhere near the quality of these quads that these guys are making, then they should be interesting. So I'll put a link in the description to this model, and I'll also put a link in the description to the flight controllers as well, in case you want to take a look. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel, and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.